So today we have with us Dr. Omar Khalidi. He is the author of the famous book Muslims in Indian Economy. Dr. Khalidi, welcome. Thanks for talking to twocircles.net. Tell us what you've been working on since your last book came out.
My current research is about the definition of India as a Hindu majority state. In my research, I argue that the construction of India as a Hindu majority state needs to be questioned. Who or what is a Hindu? For the purposes of census, for instance. The current practice is, if you are not a Muslim or a Christian, the census authorities, with the exception of Sikhs and Jains, identify everyone else as Hindu. That is Hindu by default.
Can you be an atheist in India and still counted as in census as an atheist?
No, you cannot be counted as an atheist.
Okay.
There is not such a category as atheist. So, my objection to this, the census categories, is that it does not take into account the wide diversity that represents the population of India. So, an instrument of the state, an institution of the state, ought to be as neutral as possible to reflect the widest possible diversity of the Indian population. In order to do that, the census categories need to be redefined to include people who are atheists, for one, who are not Hindu but defined as Hindu. For instance, the Dalits, the scheduled tribes. The religion of scheduled tribes or scheduled tribes is not defined because they worship a wide variety of religions. They follow a wide variety of belief systems. All that is not reflected in the census. The same is true of Dalits. If they are untouchables, if they are outside the pale of the caste system, how come they are Hindu? Who has given the census or the authorities that define census categories as Hindu?
Has there any change in census has been done since British India time? Any attempt to minimize the number of categories that people can choose? Or
yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. That before the Indian independence, the scheduled tribes were counted separately. But now, what the census authorities are doing is to include everyone as Hindu who does not conclusively establish himself as Christian and Sikh. That results in inflation of number of Hindus. These are artificial Hindus for the purposes of making a majority. In other words, they are manufacturing a majority. I think that needs to be contested by everyone who is concerned about India as a diverse society. It ought to reflect the diversity of Indian society. And one of the people most foolish about it are Muslims, Christians and others who have not interrogated this. The notion that India is a Hindu state needs to be interrogated intellectually and at the level of changing the census operations.
so, if Hindus are not in majority, is there any majority in India, or should we have that concept?
As far as I know, there is no one single group, no one single religious category in India is in majority. Every group is highly diverse, and the census needs to awaken itself to the realities on the ground and not try to manufacture a majority to serve the interests of the Hindu. That's where I think that the difference between the BJP and Congress is the difference between a thief and a crook. There is not any difference because both assume that India is a Hindu majority state. That needs to be interrogated.
So are you also arguing that we should get rid of the terminology minorities compared to
No,
majority.
the term minorities is quite valid because just about every group in India is a minority of some kind, because as I said, there is no majority. There are only minorities. So there can be a majority, but majority in relation to what other category? There might be that there are more Brahmins as compared to some other kind of caste. There might be more Kshatriyas as opposed to Brahmins. There might be more Vaishyas as opposed to Brahmins, or vice versa. But that diversity needs to come out in open and full. In other words, what's wrong with having caste enumeration in the census? I think we need to bring that diversity out. The idea is not to create or strengthen caste categories, but we know that everyone in India votes their caste. You do not cast your vote, but vote your caste. You see the big difference. You do not cast vote. So we need to understand that all groups are diverse. No group is in a majority. So today, the so-called Hindu majority is an artifact of census. It does not reflect the realities of life. And one of the issues with the Muslim Christian intellectuals is that they have not paid close attention to the wide diversity of the Indian population. Unfortunately, the kind of socializations most Muslims have would divide India into two neat, simple, undifferentiated groups, Hindu and Muslim. And there is no such thing as a Hindu. There are multiple kinds of Hindus who are all subsumed into one category. I think that needs to be questioned, that needs to be studied, that needs to be tested against the realities on the ground, so that India's amazing diversity is recognized. It is seen through instruments of the state, such as census, in order to privilege, in order not to privilege one particular religious category over the other. That is my most recent research. Secondly, I am working on interrogating, questioning the notion that India is a secular state. Merely mouthing or merely inserting the phrase that India is a secular state isn't enough. Every group, every nation, every state must be tested against its performance rather than its pretense. It is not enough to say that there is separation of church and state in America. It has to be seen against its actual operation, its day-to-day performance. So also, we need to question to see, is the notion that India is a secular state realized in everyday operations of the state, everyday working of the state. I can give you example after example that establishes that India is not a secular state. To begin with, as I said, one of the institutions of the state, the census, is actively involved in Hinduizing the state by manufacturing a majority. That is very first. Secondly, India's ministries of education are actively engaged in saffronizing, not from the time of BJP, but from the time of Nehru. Remember that. From the time of Nehru. Every function of the Union Ministry of Education began with Saraswati Vandana, which means salutation to the Hindu deity associated with knowledge. Can you imagine a state professing to be secular invoking a deity of a particular religion? Who can then claim that India is a secular state? My great salutation to the then education minister in the state of Andhra Pradesh, K. Pratibha Bharati, a Dalit woman and later on the Speaker of AP State Assembly, who led the boycott, who led the walkout from the Saraswati Vandana in 1998. That is the first time that I came to know that every function of the state, Ministry of Education, began with Saraswati Vandana. That's one instance. Now, if you go into the contents of the textbooks, the Muslim historical figures, Islamic principles are being caricatured, misrepresented, and numerous instances can be cited where Hinduism is being privileged at the expense of Christianity, Buddhism, Islam, and all other religions or non-religions or people who do not believe in any system. There ought to be a strict separation of church and state in a diverse society. That is not the case. Mouthing that India is a secular state must be judged against the performance. But it is not enough to only profess. It needs to be shown in practice.
So the Indians argue that our secularism is respect for all religion, and since Hindus predominate India, so what's wrong with respecting the heritage of Hindus in these ceremonies?
There is no harm in respecting Hinduism or any other religion, but as I said, the notion that India is Hindu majority itself is questionable. If respect is to be shown, it ought to be shown to all. You cannot privilege one religious tradition over the other. Another instance is that the institutions of the state, for instance, are actively discriminating against certain religious categories. As I have demonstrated in my book, Khaki and Ethnic Violence in India, India's armed forces recruit to this day on the basis of quote-unquote martial races. That excludes Muslims. There is a Sikh regiment, there is a Rajput regiment, there is a Maratha regiment, there is Gorkha, Dogra, you name it all. There is not a Muslim regiment. Why not? Either you abolish those regiments named after denominations and castes and regional groups and martial races, or create Muslim regiments. What's wrong with creating a Christian regiment? I don't see no harm.